Aye.
I think Rob's the only one who sent them.
So John might be filtering in later. All right, why don't I start off with just reading our little right to know checklist. All right, and Nick, are we gonna start recording?
Yeah, the recording is running.
Oh, it is running. Okay. Oh no, is it running all through our conversation?
Wait, I'll start it over again. Okay.
Thank you, John. Alrighty, as Chair of the Planning Board, due to the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis and in accordance with Governor Sununu's Emergency Order Number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this board is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, this is to confirm that we are A, providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing the Zoom platform for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number, 603-236-4730, or by clicking on the website address, www.watervillevalley.org. B, we're providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing this meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of how to access the meeting using Zoom, and instructions are provided on the Town of Waterville Valley's website at www.watervillevalley.org. C, we're providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please call 603-236-4730 or email at townofwv@watervillevalley.org. And D, we'll be adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access the meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn and have it rescheduled at that time. Please note that all votes are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. All right, so let's start with roll call attendance. And as before, if everyone could just state if there are any members of the public with you in your space. Nancy?
Nancy Knight, member.
Mike?
Mike Capel, alternate.
Bill Larson?
Bill Larson, member.
Wendy Rathgaber, member. John? I've not seen. Rich?
Rich Rita, ex officio.
Bill Spence?
Bill Spence, member.
Terry?
Jerry Waite, member.
And Rob is absent as well. All right. Thanks everyone for taking the time to put into work on our little workshop for short-term rentals. I have asked Tara to kind of be here, not just facilitating the meeting and as a member of the public, but also to help us in crafting how to move forward here, because I think we might use her help to be able to prevent getting a bit bogged down. I assume everyone had time to kind of look through and brainstorm a bit on your own. Tara, please interject if you think we should go a different way, but my initial thought was that perhaps we should look at the definitions that we need, as opposed to getting, or do you think we should have a larger discussion first?
I guess I would start by trying to figure out what your goals and concerns are, and I mean, crafting the language is kind of the last thing.
Okay.
What if you used that table that I sent and the questions. I could put them on the screen if that's helpful.
Sure.
I think it helps you think about what's okay when, and that kind of drives the discussion of why, you know, in talking about what your goals and concerns are.
Okay. That sounds like a good plan.
So in looking at, I'll leave the table up. Do you see my screen now? I know, no, unless somebody tells me.
Well, yeah, I can see the screen, but the document's not open.
Double click.
Ah,
What do you want me to do?
Oh, I think,
No, didn't work. No, Tara, you have to open it.
Karen needs to open it.
Yeah, I have it open.
no, we just see we see your screen, but not the document itself open. We see that it's listed there.
Huh, weird. All right, I'm gonna start it over. Let's do it by sharing the screen instead. Do you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
yes.
So I gotta get you out of the way. I'll go back to the table, but these are really the questions that I think you need to sort out while you're looking at the table for each item and each kind of use. Be thinking about, does this make sense as an accessory use? And it sounds like you want to be looking at different districts differently. I mean, that's kind of what some of the input's been so far, that what makes sense in LDR might not make sense everywhere else, and vice versa. So, but these are some of the kind of questions you want to think about. Is at what point does it feel more like lodging versus should somebody just be allowed to do it as an accessory use without any kind of special permit, versus when is it at a threshold that it's more like a home occupation?
In our definitions, Tara, we have, and I think you pointed this out, the 2-family residential unit, which is a single, page 9, guys, number 100, a single family residential dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit with an interior door between the 2 units. And we state in the definition, and the 2 units being maintained, same ownership, but part B of that goes on to say either the primary dwelling unit or the accessory dwelling unit or both may be rented. And these are allowed kind of across our zones. Does that
Correct.
definition?
But you're trying to find the distinction between rented to somebody who lives there and a short-term rental.
Right.
Like right now, anybody can rent their home out. But your zoning doesn't yet make clear at what point it's a lodging facility rather than a dwelling. That's really the line that you're trying to find, and it might be different in different districts. The reason you have that in there is that the state law says you have to allow accessory dwelling units, and you may or may not require that the owner live in one of them. So that's not really talking about using it for extra income necessarily with short-term rentals, but it's talking about whether the owner has to live in the building.
And I think we define hotel, lodging, etc. What we don't have is a definition for short-term rental.
Right, you
So
don't
it
have
seems
any.
to me-
You don't have any way to say, hey, you with the home in LDR, you've crossed the line where you're lodging now.
Okay,
That's really what you need to decide is, and then I could put together the language if you want at some point is, and you'll need to go through the whole ordinance and make sure you pick it up everywhere you need, but at what point, what should, like, if we put things for different districts in the table, in your case, it might be different. I mean, we could put the LDR just for the sake of discussion and the HDR C and C1 might be different. And when does it become lodging versus an accessory use? At what point does it hit a threshold where you want them to come in for a home occupation permit?
so that,
Site plan review.
so then the issue revolves around the definition of lodging.
I wish you wouldn't get stuck on definitions. It's not that simple.
I understand that, but I'm not sure how to classify where to put things if I don't know how they're defined. But if I can't define lodging or short-term rental, I don't know if it's legal or illegal, if I can put it that way, in any particular zone. What am I missing, Tara?
Well, your zoning is silent on it is the problem.
So you're saying, Tara, we just need to we need to suss out what we feel is appropriate for the town as a general.
Yeah, then I can give you the language and help you with the definitions. You know,
Okay.
you'll probably want to add a definition for transient, for example, and my recommendation for that is probably going to be offered for rent in increments less than 30 days. Because this is something I've worked with some other towns on, and that's where I keep landing.
Wait, Tara, do we need to draw a distinction? You just used the word transient. Do we need a distinction between short-term and transient? Because I would think transient is shorter than short-term.
No,
You think it's the other way around?
one term or the other.
Do you think-
I don't
You
really
think they're the same?
I don't really want to see towns use the term short-term rental. That's the big generic term that includes your lodging facilities. It includes some of their condos and hotels. It includes what people are offering in their homes. People have just gotten the habit of using that as a generic term, like they say Airbnb. But what you want to say is a word that means, well, I think offered in less than 30 days. That really is when someone's living somewhere versus vacationing.
Sure.
Sounds like a good working definition to me, Tara.
And it goes with the building code. That's how the state building code defines it too.
So then to get back to it, there's baby steps. Does the board agree that we should look at LDR different than the others?
I would think so.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with looking at it differently, but I'm,
Nope. Are you still there,
Go
Bill?
ahead, Bill, you're in the middle of a sentence.
I'm sorry. You know, I don't have a problem with looking at it differently, but I'm not ready to draw a conclusion that it's a problem.
Right.
My question is, do we have a problem?
Well, Bill, I don't think you're trying to call it a problem. I think you're trying to find how to draw the line between rental in a home and a bed and breakfast, so that you can say to somebody, I think that's a good filter. When do you say to somebody in LDR, hey, you can't do that, without them saying, well, but my neighbor's doing this? We're not saying it's bad. We're saying the zoning ordinance needs to be more clear about when and where it's allowed, and at what point it's lodging that you haven't allowed in the LDR. I'm not saying it's bad.
But Bill asks a very important question. And I guess it's my fault because I started all this. Do we need to have a definition or any restrictions at all? I
Right?
think it's the question Bill is asking.
That is the question I asked.
And I think that, and I think that's really, that is the first question we have to answer, because if the answer is yes, we need a definition, and yes, we need some level of restrictions, then we absolutely, which I think we do, then we absolutely have to do certain things. If the answer is no, we don't care, then that's a different answer.
Well, your code enforcement officer needs you to care, because right now you define accommodation unit. Let me get to that. Sorry. Any room without kitchen facilities in a hotel, motel, lodge, or other building designed for or adapted to occupancy by transient guests, but you haven't defined transient.
Well, you know,
Wait 1 second, and then your table of uses, you allow hotels, motels, inns, and public lodging in B, C, and C1, but not LDR and HDR. So some people could look at that and say, oh, well, I can't rent out the rooms in my home because I'm in HDR. And that doesn't say we can have those, but somebody else might look at it and say, oh, well, it says or other buildings, so I'm good. And that's the kind of unfairness that's sitting out there right now, that towns are trying to identify where that line is when it's not 2 rooms in your home, it's a bed and breakfast.
You know, we have another, I don't know how unique it is, but we have an interesting situation where, let's assume we call, for example, Black Bear and Golden Eagle as hotels. But those hotels have full kitchens.
Well, they're condo-tels.
Well, that's why in the table I have,
Right.
I separated in the rooms in a dwelling versus dwelling units. That's why I have that here, unit in a multifamily or condominium. That might be like those, so that you can kind of think about it in those differences.
I mean, I guess in my mind, as I was thinking through it, it kind of came down to the quantity of rooms in a home that were rented. You know, I was looking under bed and breakfast definitions, and a lot of those said, bed and breakfast have an average of 6 rooms available for rent. So in my mind, I was going to, well, perhaps, a home in any zone could rent out rooms, a homeowner could rent out rooms if it was below a certain threshold of number of rooms. And then I also, Tara, you had mentioned this in your email last night, I was also wondering about licensing for that type of thing.
And that's really a select board role. That
Okay.
once something is clearly allowed by the zoning ordinance, you might want to make a recommendation to the select board whether they want to consider some kind of business license for it. I've been given a couple different answers by different municipal attorneys about whether you then would have to require all lodging units to have the license, or whether you could narrow it to those in a home. So it's just something you'd want to check with your town council about.
But to get back to Bill Larson's question, I do think we need to clarify what is not said across all zones. That is, what is transient and where is it allowed?
Mm-hmm.
It's neither negative or positive. It's just clarifying in the zoning what we believe transient to be and where we believe it's allowed or under what conditions, et cetera, et cetera.
And then the second step of, okay, we think it should be allowed. Should it be allowed as an accessory use that we
Right.
don't talk about? Or should they need to come in for some kind of home occupation approval?
Right. And I would also, just to pick up on what Wendy said, I may stay away from, or an initial thought, I'd stay away from numbers of rooms in a house because you could rent the whole house in a transient manner.
Yeah, that's why I have separated that
Right.
out.
Dwelling units. Right.
So that you are thinking about those as different things.
Yeah.
I think thinking about transient as offered in 30 days or less increments would be a good guide for starting the discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Yeah.
One reason I like it is that it goes with the building code. And there are like safety issues if somebody is renting out 6 rooms and doesn't have any signs up saying where the fire exits are, for example, or doesn't have any smoke detectors.
Yeah, that was a big concern that I had, you know, even though people are already renting, there's no procedure in place to make sure that there are those security
Safety provisions.
measures, safety measures, yeah.
So I'm good. I'm good with the working definition of 30 days or less for transient.
Yeah, anyone have any concerns with that?
Well, my only concern, I think I said before, is that what if somebody rents for the month of August? Which is 31 days. That's why I'm like,
I'd like to see you use the term offered for rent in increments of less than 30 days. Not rented, but offered.
right, that gets back to the way the income tax definitions of things are too.
All right, so transient offered for rent for less than 30 days. That sounds good to me. Everyone else on board with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Finding
I'm okay with the definition. I'm not on board in terms of why are we doing this?
Well, we can vote on it, Bill, and then decide whether to move forward or not, or we can just move forward because that's what we're here to do.
Bill, right now, under the way your zoning ordinance is structured, everybody who's doing it is illegal. Everybody right now who's treating their home like a lodging facility in HDR or LDR is in violation. I think part of the purpose is to make them legal. If a use is silent, if the ordinance is silent on a use, it's not allowed. That's
How is it a problem in HDR?
You don't allow lodging in HDR.
Yeah, I believe we do.
Not in the zoning ordinance I'm looking at. But was amended this year.
I have a question, and I come from a slightly different world in the tax world, where if something is silent in a tax world, you can do it. And what you're saying is the opposite. If
Right.
something is silent, you can't do it.
That is how your zoning ordinance, there's 2 kinds of zoning ordinance, and yours is structured that way. The other
Okay.
way would be if you listed what's prohibited.
Okay?
Look, guys, life is short and my time is valuable. I notice that as I get older and older, we're going in circles here. Either we're going to have this discussion because we think there's a need to do it, or we're not. So, do we want to resolve that now and then go from there?
So,
Bill, you're the one who's raising, Bill Larson, you're the one who raised
Well,
the question.
Yeah, I can live with Tara's, approach, which is that it's silent right now, and we ought to say whether it's allowed or not. I agree with that.
but your ordinance says a person shall not use any lot in any zoning district except as hereinafter specifically allowed. Lodging is not allowed in, and accommodation units are not allowed in LDR and HDR, but people are doing it. So that's why towns are having this conversation, because it's become such a common, really accessory use of dwellings.
Well, accommodation units are allowed.
Well, it's not clear, because then you go to hotel and you need to clean up the definition. It's not clear. That's why I said I think some people
Yeah,
would be doing it and some not, because lodging is not allowed in LDR HDR. And for lodge, it says see hotel. It's kind of circular.
so does everyone on the board feel like we ought to allow transient rentals in a building, no matter which zone it's in? Is there any major issue with that?
Well, no, I think that the intention of HDR and LDR is residence. And therefore it's, as I tried to make my view clear in the email that I sent to everybody yesterday, that I don't think there is a problem in C1 and BC. In HDR, where housing associations have determined that there may be a problem or that there is a problem, they've created their own set of rules to eliminate or to allow. In most cases, it's been to eliminate. And the only area where I see that there is a potential problem, to answer Bill Larson's question, is that if someone in LDR were to acquire a house for the purpose of renting it rather than living in it, and allow people to use that building for whatever they saw fit, creating disturbances in an otherwise quiet residential area. That's where I think the problem could occur. I don't know that it has occurred yet, but I think that's where the potential issue is.
But the same problem could occur with someone who owns a house, lives there 180 days a year, and just really enjoys their friends and lots of loud parties. I almost think that perhaps looking at the nuisance side of things would be perhaps more appropriate than looking at limiting, because there are people who legitimately could own a home here and fall in financial difficulties, and that rental for short term could allow them to not only provide a home for themselves, but provide the income to keep that home going.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that
That's
limiting the action, but I think limiting the effect on neighbors would be the appropriate thing to look at.
Yes, and but isn't that what we're talking about?
Well, you just said you wanted to limit and not allow it.
So with that approach, I think you'd want to clarify in the zoning that it is an accessory use of a dwelling, and work with the select board on a business license.
Yes, it's not the purpose of the zoning ordinance to deal with enforcement. That's the public safety and the job of the selectmen. That's not what we can't write that sort of thing in an ordinance. At least that's
What you can put in is that there's so many parking spaces, the trash that they need to show where the trash is going to be stored, how many days a year can be rented, that it needs to meet the life safety code.
Seems downstream from where we are right now, I think. Can we get back to the beginning?
As, in terms of Bill, Rich, sorry, as far as, what Bill was saying.
Yes,
To address this, yes.
yes, I agree. I agree with that. You mean Bill Spence, but I think Bill Larson said he's fine. Let's go ahead and have this discussion because it makes sense. So what's the next step?
Well, so I think if you talked a little bit about at what point is it a bed and breakfast? That's one question that is kind of muddy in the zoning right now. You don't allow lodging in LDR, HDR, but at what point is renting out rooms in the home lodging?
Yeah, and that's where I kind of fell back to the numbers, but I mean, it's a valid point. There are certainly plenty of homes with 5 bedrooms, and if the entire home is rented out and they just happen to be different couples there, that would be different.
Yeah, with Gorham, when I was just working with, decided on 3 or more. That if it was 1 or 2 rooms, it can be an accessory use, but 3 or more, not.
And then are we looking at bed and breakfast as something that's not, I mean, under our current zoning, I suppose it's not allowed, right, in those in LDR and HDR because it's lodging.
Right.
Is the Snowy Owl a bed and breakfast?
No,
They rent out rooms and they are serving breakfast.
so is a Silver Fox.
Yeah, they are. That's true.
You don't have anything called bed and breakfast. Yeah.
Well, so is that an issue or not an issue?
Only if you decide that.
We decided it is.
Only if you decide that bed and breakfast is okay in a certain district where a hotel isn't. Right now, it would be grouped really with a hotel under your definition.
I'm fine with where it is now.
Okay. I was just
It's
asking.
come up once. We approved years ago Huntwood
Yeah,
as a bed and breakfast, and at the time, I remember the discussion. The question was, on what basis are we approving this?
yeah. I mean, it very quickly became a kind of a circular argument in my head. You know, someone could have a home that they own with 5 bedrooms. They're hanging out in 1 bedroom. They're an empty nester. They need some help. They have transient people come in to occupy those 4 other rooms. Maybe they have an open kitchen for people to use as they want. A, is there anything wrong with that? And B, does that then put them in a business category?
And does it make a difference of whether they live there or not?
Exactly.
Or are they renting it more like a hostel?
Right.
And those are the things that you would try to, those are exactly the kind of parameters you need to think about. At what point does it look and feel more like one than the other, more like a business than a home? What makes that difference? The number of rooms, whether somebody lives there.
Is not a bed and breakfast manifestly a business?
Yeah.
Therefore, it's lodging, a type of lodging.
That's where I was thinking, yeah.
But right now, is it, how many bedrooms makes that difference? That's what you're looking for.
I see.
If 5 is a business, well, we can't do it in LDR, HDR right now. But it's not clear. If I have 3 or 4 bedrooms, it's not clear to me if I'm a bed and breakfast or somebody renting out rooms in my home.
I would think renting out one room where you're serving them breakfast as a business, as opposed to a rental of a unit where they live there.
I think anything that ends up with money transferring is a business.
There's no impact.
But that's very expansive.
Oh.
And it's okay to define it that way. I guess the next thing is there anything wrong with that? If it's not negatively impacting the neighborhood.
Or,
Hopefully they'll be done by now.
and how many rooms is it lodging too?
Well, Terry was just saying that at just one, it sounds like it's lodging. Was that
Well,
what
he's
you were
saying
saying?
it's a business, but now is it lodging that you can't do in the LDR, HDR?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So something could be a business that provides a roof over someone's head, but not necessarily lodging until it gets to 5 rooms.
Right, it could be a home occupation. There could be a category that's a home occupation,
Gotcha.
which I can't readily find your section on home occupation. I have your ordinance right here, but not finding where you regulate those, what the parameters are. Lost that. Within A.
Well,
I
I
can't
think
remember
about
whether you require a permit for that.
a valid question is, do we want businesses operating in LDR?
I'm sure you have a whole lot of them already.
Yeah, especially these days.
All right, I found home occupation.
My
So-
point of view would be that as long as as the noise was kept down, the issue is the social inconveniences. So it's noise, it's parking, and it's somebody mentioned, public safety. And as long as those are met, I don't have a problem with anything anybody wants to do.
So you would feel like parking in itself would be a limitation as to how many rooms are within the way. As long as people aren't overflowing onto the street, then it's within the parameters of how that home was designed.
I would, that's exactly the position I take, that as long as you have the parking, you have to, if you're gonna declare that you're gonna have rooms for rent, then you have to provide parking for those people.
And I did find the home occupation section, and you do say in there, home occupation shall provide additional off-street parking to accommodate associated employee and other vehicle parking shall not be allowed in the street. So you've covered that if you decide to call it a home occupation. Doesn't look like you require any permit for home occupation. Not seeing that. I'm just seeing the home occupation that's allowed as an accessory use if it meets these criteria. So I don't know who would be making sure they meet the life safety code if you added that.
Yeah, let's turn that around like that, Tara. I mean, if someone is offering rooms for rent, ought not they be abiding by state fire and safety as well as town parking regulations? And therefore, ought not there be a licensing or permitting involved with that, as happens in BC and C1?
That's a select board issue, right
The
there.
licensing, is it at the state level or the local level?
Nobody needs a license for it in Water Valley right now. I mean,
Yeah.
But could we require, it, or would that be a select board? Like if we say that we feel like this ought to be allowed, however, to have a fallback for any repetitive nuisance complaints for overflow parking, etc., would the license be a way to create sort of a local regulation on that?
well, you can require they get a zoning permit for this kind of home occupation, and that to get the zoning permit, they need to show they meet these things.
I was thinking more in terms of if someone is operating a business to provide lodging to people, does that not bring into play state safety requirements?
Yeah, the problem is it usually doesn't with these And there's this kind of creep of the person with 1 or 2 bedrooms versus the one that a 6-room bed and breakfast.
It is a numbers, it's driven by the numbers of rooms that you're renting out of the building. So I don't know what the exact number is, but I know that the bed and breakfast, that buildings that we have had where people have come in for permits, Chris's determination on whether or not they need sprinkler systems and additional emergency exits and certain parking setups has all been based on the number of rooms they have for rent. I think it's problematic if you're talking about someone who's renting a room or their single family home online. How are you going to track those? I'm not sure if you put the requirement in, I don't know how you actually implement the enforcement.
Yeah, my thought was that it would just be if there are problems, if there's a noise complaint continuously.
Well, but those are already covered under state statute. So if there's a noise complaint, we don't need a town regulation. The public safety department can take care of it through the state laws. It's a nuisance. So it's covered.
It's covered in what way? Well, how do you mean?
Well, they can fine the person, they can summons someone, they can arrest someone if they're violating the state law. And there are state laws for nuisance, for noise.
And that would be the homeowner, not the person causing the noise?
No, it would be the person causing the noise. It would be the person physically here.
Mark, do we have a town ordinance against noise?
We do, but
Yes, we do, but then it's backed up by state law, and any circumstance that's not covered by our town noise ordinance is covered by state law. Under nuisances.
Our nuisance ordinance refers only to construction activity.
Right.
It does not refer to any other type of activity. So we default to state on that. And I believe may have been 2 meetings ago, Mark, refresh my memory, we asked public safety to redraft that nuisance ordinance to open it up to beyond construction activity.
Yes, and they are looking at that
Right.
now. Yep.
But I think we may be going down a rabbit hole if we try to shape what's allowed and not allowed in different zones on some concept of what's a nuisance and.
Well, no, I'm just saying enforcement, Rich. I
Right.
just think that it's much easier for public safety if we not include something
Right.
in here that can be taken care of under existing statute.
Right.
And
I agree
if
with
what you're trying to do is take care of noise nuisances or parking issues, those can be taken care of under either other town regulations or state law. So I
Right.
don't think you need to address that in here.
I agree.
Right.
I
No,
agree.
not address it, but use it in a way to help us decide. The conversation has been around if a home's rooms could be rented within the parameters of existing parking. Is that a way to decide if it's appropriate or not?
And
Well, you
also
already-
mentioned noise in the home occupation section. There's to be no offensive noise. So, I mean, there's a second thing that the town can do some enforcement under.
Mhm.
But I think you still kind of have this question hanging out there of when is it a home occupation versus when is it lodging? what, I think that's really the main thing that's kind of blatantly missing from the zoning ordinance right now. When is it, where do you want to draw the line between home occupation and lodging?
Would that be a different line depending on the type of unit?
Yeah, it may be, that's why I do the
Right.
table like this.
Right.
It doesn't look like you make somebody come back in for a zoning permit for a home occupation. It looks like it's just treated as an accessory use, so. So I think that would be a good way to go through this table would be what's a home occupation and what's lodging.
Sure.
Okay.
I think if you did that for this table, you'd be pretty far along.
Perfect sense.
It almost seems like it's easier to start with the denser side of the table, like a unit in a multifamily dwelling, unit in a condominium. In my mind anyway, it's easier to say that that could be rented and that would not fall under lodging.
Where these are exclusive ordinances, meaning if it's not listed, it's not allowed. And if you go into this home occupation, you'd end up listing those that are allowed, and everything else would be disallowed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would probably add it to the definition of home occupation. Say home occupation includes these things.
And then if it's not included, then it's not allowed.
Correct.
So if you don't include lodging or bed and breakfast or hotel or any of those in the definition of home occupation, then it is by definition not allowed.
Right, but what I would think might be the outcome of your work would be adding to the definition of home occupation something like includes the rental for transient use of blah, blah, blah. So many bedrooms, whatever.
If you wanted to include it.
Yeah. And again, it's the rental it's the transient rental that you're thinking about home occupation versus lodging.
Does anyone see an issue with having transient rentals in condominiums?
No,
No, and if anybody does, then the housing association can deal with it.
So you lost my place in here with a. You don't have those in LVR, do you?
No.
There's only one housing association in LDR, and that's Moose Run.
So this,
They're not completely in LDR.
I don't know why that's green, but that's different.
What does that mean, Wendy?
I mean, part of the Moose Run Association goes into BC as well.
You don't allow multifamily in LDR. We don't need to do that one.
Right.
No, but I'm just saying, in terms of, as you mentioned, HDR is a bit hazy as well.
So HDR, VC, and C1, you're proposing for starters. That's an accessory use in those districts there.
Yeah, that just seems to me an easy way to ease into it, because that seems fitting.
Yeah.
Unless if someone on the board disagrees.
No.
So two family dwellings aren't allowed in LDR. There's a table here. Here.
So two-family dwellings,
The only dwellings in HDR.
right. So do we have any, basically, are we saying an HDR renting, renting your units is fine as long as they're multifamily, two-family or more? In HDR, does that seem like an easy thing to say? Yes, it's allowed. Transient rentals.
The thing is that in LDR, you do allow family residential units.
I'm sorry?
In LDR, you do allow two-family residential units, both of which can be rented.
Yeah, let's just take the bottom two squares first. I'm just trying to tick a couple things. I'm trying to narrow it.
I would
Let's run
think,
ahead, Terry.
I would think in dwelling units, and in both, the, HDR and VCC1 categories, accessory would fit, no? I mean,
Sorry,
just across the board.
I missed the beginning of what you said because I was back to, that's right. I guess you do have to talk about, it's an accessory dwelling unit rather than any.
Right.
But in HDR and in BC and C1, wouldn't transient be accessory in all these categories of dwelling units?
I would think so.
I would think so.
Would you make that leap to single-family dwellings that are in those zones as well?
I go by zone. If I'm trying to understand what the difference would be in a single family dwelling.
Right.
Is a single-family dwelling still a single-family dwelling if they have an apartment, for example, over their garage, which they rent?
No, that's the, under your thing called the two-family residential unit.
Yeah. The ADU.
Because we have a bunch of that.
Right, that's an accessory dwelling unit?
Yeah, none of us do.
Yeah.
I don't know, Tara, are we missing some single family unit? Wouldn't that be the same in those zones? I mean, does it matter? If we're looking at it in terms of zoning, why couldn't an owner of a single family dwelling in BC C1 certainly rent it out in a transient manner as we understand it? And if it happens to be in HDR, since we allow it for other types of units, what's the difference for a single family unit? I throw that out as a question. I'm just struggling with trying. It seems to me it's all the same, but I could be missing something, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, I agree with you, Rich. It seems like in those zones, we're looking for that density. We're looking for that more transient nature. Does anyone have an issue with single-family dwelling in HDR or BCC1 being a home occupation, accessory use for the transient rentals? I'll take the silences now.
Right. I'm sure we'll get a lot of comments when we throw this out for public review.
Oh, yes. All right.
One of the issues that comes up all the time is, what is it the business of the town to tell people what they can do and what they can't do?
Yes.
Okay, then,
If you have a zoning ordinance,
Yes.
people must have thought it is. So I worked for one town where they didn't think it is.
Right.
All right, so then we can focus, it seems to me, on the LDR with the single-family dwelling and the ADU, right? Kind of narrow our discussion here.
What do you mean by ADU?
For the two-family residential unit, the additional dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit that's allowed for the two-family residential unit.
It's.
There's a connecting
difference
door.
Between a duplex and the apartment over the ground.
Right.
There's
It's
a
the
connecting door.
Yeah, it's the same ownership and it can't be created to be separate ownerships.
Right.
Which would apply kind of in both cases, I think.
What do you mean?
Would apply if you've got if you own a duplex or if you own a house with a garage and a unit over the garage. I think both of those kind of are the same.
No, you don't allow the duplex in LDR.
Yeah.
You allow the ADU because you have to under state law.
Again, it's an internal door difference, that's all, right? I mean, is
But
that-
you don't allow the duplex in LDR.
Yeah, and already in our definitions, we do say that for the 2-family residential unit, that one or both may be rented. So it's a matter of honing down whether one or both may be rented in a transient manner.
in LDR.
In LDR, yes.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
And in my mind, I don't see the issue if it's owner occupied. That seems like a no-brainer to me. It's more if it's not owner occupied.
In other words, the other unit can be rented if the owner's living in, you're talking about the single family dwelling, the 2-family residential unit?
Right. I suppose actually in either, in the single
Okay.
family dwelling or in the 2-family residential unit, just in terms of trying to make it a narrower discussion. I feel like if the owner is there, the homeowner is present, then in my mind anyway, that seems like an accessory use, but I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
You mean like renting a room or whatever?
Right.
Renting
Again,
the other unit,
yeah, probably below like a
right?
threshold in my mind anyway.
I kind of agree with Wendy.
Yeah.
Is it that it's owner occupied while the person renting it is there, or that it's their primary residence that makes a difference?
When I was thinking about it, it seemed owner occupied, but maybe primary residence as well.
A lot of people do that just because it keeps the noise down and makes sure that things aren't trashed, right?
Right.
Right.
If it's someone's primary residence, they're there for at least 180 days of the year. So that's the argument with that, right?
When they're using it to mean it's their primary residence rather than they're there at the time, it's usually because they don't want to lose housing to companies that are buying it for the short-term rental market,
Sure.
which may not be a goal of Watteau Valley, where you are more of a resort town.
Well, we would like a mix. We're talking about LDR. Yeah, we don't want houses bought up.
So that may be where you want to think about a limit on the number of days, so that if I'm only there in the summer, I could rent it in winter, and or vice versa. And
but don't we already have that?
No, we're talking transient, less than 30.
Right,
right, but
because that what you said, okay, never mind.
like Gorham came up with 120 as they were trying to find. Well, they got some input that maybe you need 160 in order to make it make sense to buy it just for that. That's kind of how they were trying to stay below the number where it made sense as an investment just for short-term rental. Sorry,
Yeah,
you
that would be hard for us to pin down because you can, rent for so much more during holiday weeks and
different in every community.
yeah.
And we're talking about just one unit in a 2-unit structure. We're not talking about a room in a
Yeah, we're
unit.
not up to the room yet.
Right, okay.
Right. So this is
That's the other chart, right, I see. So commonly, Terry is saying that a town would use days as a way of dealing with this?
No, I didn't use the word commonly
Okay,
because most towns are still at the point of starting to try to get your arms around it. So there really isn't a commonly yet.
well, from your professional standpoint, what would a reasonable approach be, given what you're seeing happening in New Hampshire around towns? I know we're a little different than other towns, but
I think putting a number of days on it does tend to keep it where somebody's renting out their own home versus buying it to rent.
But in a sense, for our town's purposes, if someone's claiming residency here, they are claiming that they live here a certain number of days. So if a home is somebody's primary residence, then by default, they're there a certain number of days, so they can only rent it for a certain number, right?
Wendy, I'm not too sure about that. I don't think there's a days limit on a residency requirement.
The problem with that anyway is you really aren't allowed to regulate ownership.
Oh. Okay.
You really can't say Joe Smith can rent his home, but I rent homes in Waterville Valley Incorporated can't.
Okay.
That's why people come in and we're using this other tool of how many days would make it less of a motivation for a company to buy the home just for that.
And Tara, do you have a professional opinion on the answer to that question?
You know, I think as Wendy was pointing out, it's different in every community because, you know,
I had to drop off.
this year I've been working with Forum. They don't have the same kind of seasonal
Okay,
market.
if they have any
but
questions, let me know.
They
Text
saw a lot
me
of homes
or I
that sat
can
on the market a long time being bought up by people because of the ATV industry up there. But it's not big rents, so
How about a community like ours? What would you think would be would make sense for excuse me, Waterville Valley?
yeah, I think somebody in real estate can answer that better than me.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, depends on the seasonality. I mean, if someone
Yeah.
wanted to essentially pay a large amount of their mortgage, they could rent it out Christmas holiday week, mass vacation week in February, 4th of July, Columbus Day weekend, and be along, you know, in a substantial house that could really pack.
And that's all probably good, but the question I think for somebody more knowledgeable in Waterville Valley real estate is if somebody was looking at just buying a home as an investment and they saw this limit on the number of days, what's the number that would discourage them from buying it just as an investment?
Right.
So perhaps we can leave that open until we can just recognize the question that we have to answer. I think Mike, or is that Tina I'm looking at there? No, it says Tina. It says Tina on the screen.
Oh, no, I'm using her iPad.
Yeah, but to point it at the ceiling. Any event, I
I'm
think
sorry.
Mike Aronson was on your committee, correct?
Yes,
So perhaps that's a question we could ask him to help us with.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, good.
And number of days, you mean consecutive or calendar year, or does it matter? Is that a
Calendar year, right?
calendar year?
Calendar year, yeah, I would think.
Cumulative calendar year. Now that we have cumulative days for COVID, so we might as well have cumulative days here.
So is that what the board is seeing as a good limiting ceiling for whether both a single-family dwelling and two-family residential unit, whether it's a home occupation or a business? Is number of days sufficient? Or do we need to look at number of rooms?
No, I'm just in the camp of, why are we doing this again? I mean, I understand the Gorham example, as presented, but I don't think we have anything like that. So why are we trying to regulate what you can use your home for?
Bill, I think you're trying to clarify for people in the residential districts what they're allowed to do without getting in trouble for having an illegal bed and breakfast.
But Bill, this comes back to the first question that said, if something is silent, does that mean you can do it? Or if something is silent, it means you can't? And what Tara said is that in our world, if something is silent, it means you can't do it.
Well, that's what your zoning ordinance says explicitly.
But no, I agree. That I went back and read it, and I agree with you. So basically, Bill, what we're saying is we have to put something in place so that people can do it, which is kind of backwards to the way you normally think.
It's called being a permissive zoning ordinance. Even though
Right.
that sounds a little backwards.
Right. So basically, normally you think of something, you're putting something in place to stop people from doing something. In our case, we're talking about putting things in place so people can do something.
Right.
You're muted, Bill. You're muted, Bill.
I am in the camp of allowing people to do what they want.
Which means that we have to put something in there.
So Bill, you would not want to limit the number of days. You would say if someone has a single family dwelling, they should be able to rent it, no matter how many rooms they have, however frequently, as long as they have the parking to allow for it.
As long as the only issue I can come up with is the parking and the noise. Is the reason why you want to prevent this. And if we had a noise problem, then we would deal with the noise. Parking, I don't even want to get into that.
So Bill might want to see the zoning amended to allow bed and breakfast in the LDR.
Yes, I would. And the reason is that if this issue came up before the board and it allowed it.
Yeah, it's a very valid point.
Okay, so when Craig Larson builds cottages on his property and offers them in a bed and breakfast format, does the town have anything to say about it?
It's better if you don't talk about a particular property, Bill.
Yeah. We are talking about a single family dwelling and a two-family residential unit. Those are the parameters that we're talking about here.
Well, it sounds like I'm sorry, Bill, it looked like you were going to say something. Bill Larson?
Oh,
It seems to me, I think we have this is a discussion. We don't have potentially complete agreement among the board, but I think we have enough members on the board to say that we can look at it this way, and therefore we can move on to rooms in a dwelling at this point. And then when we put it all together, we can decide whether we like it or not.
And that's why it took Gorham from February till now.
Oh, don't say that.
Well, it's
Oh, you could see very well why that happened.
Yes.
it was 6 meetings.
No, it's right.
Because of the push and pull in this conversation we're having now. I mean, it seems that we're having a great deal of difficulty in trying to define what we want to do and what the issue is, even whether there's even a question.
Right.
So
I-
this
I
is a
would
very
disagree
difficult
with
issue.
that. I think there's consensus, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself in Bill Larson's camp where I don't necessarily see that there's an issue unless if there's an issue.
I don't think there's an issue until you include home occupation, which kind of opens the door that has many fingers. So I think that it might even be a good idea to include home occupation on this chart.
Well, I think that when you talk about allowing it as an accessory use, you're talking about it as a home occupation.
Well, if you read the definition, a use conducted entirely within the dwelling except for gardening, which is incidental and secondary to the use of the dwelling for dwelling purposes, and which does not change the residential character thereof. Now, you could easily fit an inn or some bed and breakfast in on that.
What you're doing here, though, I think what you'd be leading toward is adding to that definition to say, yeah,
I just think it has to be addressed along with the other.
I think using the filter of at what point is it a bed and breakfast that's not allowed in the LBR? Is it, you know, that's lodging. You don't allow lodging.
You don't allow lodging, but then if I was the developer, I would go the other route and say, well, it's a home occupation and I'm not changing the residential nature, and therefore it's allowed.
Well, I'd argue that if you run it as a bed and breakfast, it's not secondary to the use of the dwelling for dwelling purposes.
Well, if I've got a house and I want to rent part of it out as an inn, then it would look like secondary residential to me, accessory.
And because we can't agree on that is why you want to have it clear in the zoning ordinance.
That's why I think the definition has to be addressed.
Yep. That's what we're doing, I think.
Okay, that sounds like a step forward to me. Instead of the confusion, we have to outline it, what we mean in the definitions in the ordinance.
Right.
That we're doing through this process.
That's what I can propose some language for you to think about when you get through this table.
All right, so if we look at rooms in a dwelling. Again, are we kind of just focused on LDR?
I think so.
I think so.
Yes.
Okay. So if we look at not owner occupied in LDR,
That's an investment property then, right?
well,
If you're renting out rooms in
It's
a
a
home,
hostel.
it's a hostel. So it's a type of lodging. So by our definition, it's
This
not
is-
allowed.
It's not allowed.
Did I
now,
get that right?
by not owner occupied, does that mean not owner occupied as well transient guests are there, or that it's not someone's primary residence?
Yeah, you need to decide that.
So I would
it's
think if it's someone's primary residence, then it wouldn't qualify it as lodging.
It's,
Well, what if they're there for 6 or 7 months of the year and the rest of the time they're rented out on weekends?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And this-
I think that they're not there.
But
If that's our definition.
I'm not sure that I agree in limiting that.
you can change this. I mean, have me change this. Doesn't work, but again, you can't regulate ownership. The tough
Right.
thing. I mean, you could try saying, you know, if it's a hall that's somebody's primary residence, I just don't know if that's defensible.
The risk that we're taking here is that we would put limitations on those who buy a home, the second home. That is, let's say if if I bought a home as a second home, I used it for several months of the year, but for the rest of the year, instead of leaving it vacant, I wanted to rent it.
Well, that's down here. What we're talking about is if you rented one room in it to one family and another room to another family. If you're renting out the whole dwelling, you've got that covered in the bottom half of the rule.
If we're looking at it in terms of rooms in a dwelling, that sounds like a business to me. We're not talking about the house, the single family dwelling. We're talking about renting out rooms.
Yes, all along, I think what we tried to do is limit the possibility of creating rooming houses in LDR.
Okay, what if we start at the top of the chart? That seems easier. 1 or 2 rooms in an owner-occupied residence. How, I mean, that to me seems, the owner's there, they have 1 or 2 rooms that they have transient guests in. That seems pretty reasonable. What does the board think about that?
I would agree with you, Wendy.
And if you call it a home occupation, then you're already covering the parking and noise and all. You've got that.
Is
Okay.
any issue with that?
So I think the one question here is the cutoff 2? Is it 3? Is it 4?
Right. But there again, is it a factor of the parking?
I think, to me, a way to look at it would be would a reasonable person see just 1 or 2 rooms as accessory? And once you start talking 3, 4, 5 rooms, is that really accessory, or is that really primary?
Yeah, it becomes a
There really
business.
that many
It
rooms.
becomes a rooming house.
Exactly, yeah, or something like that. I don't know what the proper term is, but I agree with you, Bill.
Except what I'd come back to is what's the difference? And I know besides monetary, what's the practical difference between someone owning a house with, say, 5 bedrooms and having just different guests come and stay who are friends of theirs and they're not charging money? What's
That's
the
different, though.
different? How is
One's
it
a
different?
business and one isn't.
One thing that we hear from towns is for the neighbors, whether the frequency of it, is it every weekend that they're not getting enough sleep when they have to get up and go to work? Does it still feel like a neighborhood?
Right.
Right.
I think 1 or 2 rooms is a good cutoff for that sort of,
Yeah.
again, reasonable. When you think about it, a reasonable person thinks about it. I don't know if that's a legal standard, but that just seems to me reasonable. A couple rooms, sure.
Yeah, I agree.
That's accessory. Anything more than that, you're just starting to tread into running a business or whatever you want to call it.
Wait. How are we defining a business?
You're trying to do that right now.
Yeah.
So if somebody is renting out 2 rooms in their home, clearly they have to have the parking available for that, A. Do we want to make sure, and maybe this is a question for Chris, should we make sure that those rooms that are being rented out have proper fire and smoke detectors and all of those things?
We'll get to that as a next step.
Oh, never mind.
But I think if you
Let me give you an example of what I believe is a real example. Suppose I buy a piece of property and I get 5 other couples to agree to go in with me and to share the rent. So you got a family in each room in the property. Is that Is that okay?
And they're paying money to support you? Yes.
Yeah, right.
That's allowed. That's owner occupied.
So the distinction is that it's owner occupied.
Well, that's already allowed. That,
Right.
it's already clear that that's already allowed. There's no limit on how many owners. 'Cause it's
I
not,
didn't think Bill was saying owners. Bill was saying, I buy the property and other people are coming up and and I've made a deal so that other people are coming up and using it. They don't own it, but they're paying me rent.
oh, I see.
I think that's what Bill said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, it's a real case, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think there are several of them.
And is there anything objectionable about that?
No, I think that's what the nature of Waterville Valley is, and we ought to allow that.
Even in LDR.
In LDR,
So that's under the not owner occupied list. Square.
Is it?
Well, basically, I'm sitting here and I bought it, and I may or may not be there, but other people are there on a regular basis and paying me rent.
I'm not sure it matters whether you have a deal with them or not. If you're renting out more than 2 rooms, now you're talking about where the room cutoff is.
In a non-owner occupied environment.
You're basically setting up a rental lodge in LDR.
Except in Bill's example, it's, as I understand it, the same 5 families invested in that property, so to speak.
And they're all owners.
Right, in my mind, a transient guest is a different person
Right.
potentially or a different family potentially every weekend, not the same.
Yeah, if
I
they
don't
own
know.
the property.
Well,
It's
Mark-
fine.
Is Mark on the line?
No, Mark had to step out.
Can you in Waterville Valley have 5 different families, unrelated families as owners of property?
Of course you could.
Yeah,
Yeah, why not?
You know,
Okay,
You can't regulate ownership, and that property is not being offered in increments of less than 30 days.
Right.
probably true.
Right.
So that's not our problem today.
As far as what we decided as a guide for this discussion, for now, it wouldn't be.
Okay,
It does help illustrate that this is kind of a slippery slope.
Yes.
Doesn't that
A
kind of,
very slippery slope.
that's
doesn't
my
that kind of,
point in bringing it up, that it's a slippery slope.
it looks like a condominium setup where you have the owners occupying the units in one building, and they're all owners.
It is by agreement.
Well, part of the slippery slope argument is that if say 5 families decided to buy a large home in LDR, which would typically be one owner. So now you have a density that was, shall we say, from the point of view of the other neighbors, never intended.
You know, you can't regulate ownership though, and I know you don't want to think about behavior, but it's behavior that's driven a lot of towns to have some regulation. Those people have a long-term interest in the property versus the one that just is there for the weekend and will never be back.
Exactly. It's a huge difference in perspective, I think.
There's a motivation to get along with the neighborhood and not trash the property.
I don't think there's anything we're doing here that limits that situation.
No, you
No,
can't.
we can't.
Right.
But it's highlighting, the number of people potentially at a residence. I still, in my mind, I think it still comes down to the impact on the neighbors. But
Yes.
But still, what if you have a family with 7 kids? I mean,
yeah,
to me, it's a non-issue as far as what what we're about here.
Yeah, I
So
think
then
many-
why does it matter? I mean, the slope that it slides into is why does it matter then if someone has a home with,
Everything is a slippery slope. Everything is a slippery slope. At some
Well,
point,
I
you have to
do
make
think-
decisions.
I do think part of it is the person who lives there with 7 kids has a motivation to
Yeah.
get along with the neighborhood and not trash the property.
Right, you would hope,
Versus one with 7 kids who's only there for the weekend.
right. That's the truth.
all right,
So
so
therein lies the difficulty in trying to put into words something that fits into an ordinance
And why
that covers this
why
territory.
it would normally take 6 months.
But a table helps.
Yeah.
A table makes it very easy, or easier.
So if we're looking at, we're on the square, more than 2 rooms, owner occupied dwelling.
I think we're trying to make the distinction that more than 2 rooms becomes, as we were saying earlier, the business.
Yeah,
So that's not allowed then, because it's
Yeah.
lodging.
I would have that cut off, yes. Again, this is a discussion. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a business, but then is that a business we don't want to allow? I guess that's a whole other thing,
I
but,
mean, we can let Tara go at it and still think about it and see if we're happy with the 2-room, 2 or below.
Yes, it's something that you don't want to allow in LDR. In BC and C1, it's not
well,
an issue.
it's something that we're defining as a business. I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say it's something we wouldn't want to allow. I think that's a whole other discussion. we
So
should-
everything's kind of a home business already.
Right. No, I think it's not allowed. I mean, I think we are trying to determine whether it's allowed or not. Again, using a reasonable person's standard of the difference in quantity.
Do you need a new use called bed and breakfast? Do you need something between a home occupation and lodging? Between a home occupation and a hotel? Is that part of the problem?
I think so. And I personally don't see the issue with a bed and breakfast.
I think bread and breakfast makes sense. It's not going to resolve this issue completely. I think you said partial, right? Tara, a
Well,
partial solution?
No, I mean, why couldn't you add a category to your use list called bed and breakfast? And clarify where that line is between a hotel and a bed and breakfast, and allow a bed and breakfast in the LDR if you want to. You could have it be by special exception in the LDR, so that
Right.
the zoning board would look at things like screening and parking and whatnot. Maybe in the HDR, it's not a special exception. I mean, you have all those categories in there. It doesn't have, I just made the table to be kind of a guide, but there's obviously more options within each box.
Right.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. But again, you could still have like 3 rooms, but not be a bed and breakfast.
No, we right now, you'd be saying 3 rooms is a bed and breakfast and would need to come in for a zoning permit for this new use.
Even if they're not serving breakfast, even if they're just renting out rooms in a building,
Well, you need to decide that. You decide how you want to define it. But right now, it sounds like it's more than an accessory to a dwelling, but you don't necessarily want to say no to it. So here's kind of a placeholder is, well, maybe you need more categories in your lodging. Maybe
Yeah, I like
it's not a black and white, but here's something kind of in between.
If we call something bed and breakfast, I think the average understanding of that in this town will be that that's a business, and we're allowing a business, or we're considering allowing a business through special exception in LDR.
Yep.
Right.
That's what we're talking about.
Right. Okay.
Well, isn't that exactly why LDR was set up? Because they weren't supposed to have that?
Yeah, I think
I
we'll
agree
get a
with
lot of
that.
resistance. Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of opposite the intention of that zone, as opposed to areas
Right.
more towards the center of town, where, for example, I am.
I think so. I think you're right.
Does it make sense in the HDR?
Oh, sure.
I think we should come back to the question of what values that are included in this table would change the nature of the neighborhood. Because I think if you went to town meeting and said to the people who were attending that we intend to allow bed and breakfast in LDR, you would find a great deal of objection.
But when we had bed and breakfast in LDR, it was supported in the past, enthusiastically.
Oh, well, that's what town meetings are for. But
Was that at the planning board
it's on
level?
my
or was
part
that-
that it would be, that there would be many people who would raise objection to that.
That was the
I might be
planning
wrong.
board, correct? Not town meeting.
It was planning board, yes.
I can't remember actually who approved it.
I think that there was some influence there.
Oh, yes.
So perhaps it's not a good example.
As of now, it is not allowed in LDR.
Correct.
I think most people would prefer to keep it that way myself, but
So
I
I
don't know that for a fact.
would put not allowed in that box.
Yeah, I would still like to put a pin in that though and explore the bed and breakfast. And perhaps it needs to be a whole other thing than this transient discussion. I would love to get feedback from our population and see what people really do, how they'd vote about it, how they feel about it. Because in my mind, a well-run bed and breakfast in LDR would potentially have far less impact on their neighbors than a second homeowner who was using it as party central for them and their friends.
Potentially.
Potentially,
Right,
yes.
How do you write that kind of distinction?
But you're reasoning by extremes. You're not looking at, I think, anyway.
What you could do when you get to the point of having it in the form of zoning amendment, you could just break that piece out for the first public hearing.
I want to go back and think about this for a second. Isn't a bed and breakfast almost directly opposite what LDR is supposed to be? LDR is supposed to be basically single-family homes, which is directly opposite from what a bed and breakfast is.
I wouldn't say directly opposite because
Well, maybe not 180 degrees, but of 120 degrees.
I mean, if it's owner occupied and we already have the allowance for two-family residential unit to have part of that rented out and owner occupied, I wouldn't say it's 180 degrees different.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between a place that has 1 or 2 rooms and a place that has 5 or 6 or 7.
Yes.
In the amount of traffic that's involved, cars in and out, people checking in at various times, I think it's a significant difference. But it may not be 180 degrees, but it is a difference, I think.
What we're talking about is the character of the neighborhood.
We're talking about the character of the neighborhood. Yes.
And that's why people, when they buy a home and spend a lot of money to get into the neighborhood, it's the style of living that they expect to acquire when they make that purchase. So then if somebody comes along and says, well, I'm allowed to have a bed and breakfast here and converts one of the homes in the neighborhood to that, it changes the character of the neighborhood.
If you put a bed and breakfast, and I don't mean to pick on Bill, but we'll pick on Bill Larson. If somebody built a bed and breakfast on the new things that are being built on River Road, I don't think that would go over real well.
I think you're right.
But I don't think you can stop it.
But that's what we're trying to do, Bill.
But I think what right now, as
We don't
I
allow
understand what Tara said, is that if something is not specifically allowed, it's not allowed. And I think that we want to, in that case, I think we want to definitively not allow it, would be my example. Even that's not obviously where we live. I think that is clearly not why people bought in that area.
I agree with Mike. There's a qualitative difference here. We're kind of arguing how many angels can you have dance on the head of a pin. I think, yeah, I mean, a bed and breakfast is going to be perceived as a business because that's what it is. Whereas renting out 1 or 2 rooms is rightly or wrongly not perceived so much as a business.
It's considered incidental.
Well, that's what we're trying to determine.
Right.
But in any event, I've got to run, guys. Thank you. Sorry for talking so much, and good luck with the rest of this. All right. I'm up for discussing whatever you guys come up with. We'll discuss it some more.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Rich.
It
Take
sounds
care.
like
Bye.
it may make sense in the HDR, since, I mean, that's a denser district, and right now lodging's not allowed. Maybe that's kind of a transitional thing where something between the residents and the lodging.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's at least worth looking at. So then our final little square, not owner occupied.
So this is gonna be accessory all the way across, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so not owner occupied, transient rentals and LDR. Well, why don't we start with the HDR?
Is village condos in HDR? I think it is.
I think so.
Do you think the people in village condos would have a problem? And I don't mean to pick on them, but as an example, with an 8-room bed and breakfast?
I don't know.
I don't either, but I'm just kind of, I know people, we know all the people who live there. I'm just out of curiosity, when I see them, I'll ask them
And they have a homeowners association.
They do have a homeowners association.
They'd also get a public hearing notice if you have it be a special exception.
But if they have a homeowners association and they have a problem with it, they can deal with it.
Just to keep things moving on. So are you saying, Mike, you don't think bed and breakfast should be considered an HDR?
I don't think that was the intent. And I know talking about intent is a funny word. But I don't think that's what the intention of HDR was.
But HDR can have condos and
It does have condos.
So I don't see how a bed and breakfast would provide a lot of different traffic or impact.
There's a difference between a condo and a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, but I think you're confusing the land with the association. Let's suppose the village condos wasn't there, it was torn down. Would you allow someone to come in and build a bed and breakfast on that piece of property?
Very good question.
So why don't we just leave a pin in it for now? And, we've certainly had a lot of good discussion and
Okay.
more to be had, but a lot to digest. Let's leave that something we continue to think about.
Let me ask one more thing on the table where the uses are not permitted.
I'm sorry, what?
On the table where you have permitted uses, many of these squares have the small a in it, which I'm assuming means accessory use, is that correct?
Yes,
And if it doesn't have an accessory or an A in the box for LDR, when it comes to inns and motels and lodging and so forth, that would not be allowed even as an accessory use, is that correct?
right now, that's correct.
Yes.
So that if nothing was done, no one can come in and put lodging of any sort, bed and breakfast, as an accessory use in LDR, is that right?
They wouldn't legally be doing it, but we have this thing that talks about, you know, the way you define home occupation right now leaves it unclear at what point it would be okay as a home occupation.
But isn't that an accessory, isn't a home occupation an accessory use?
Right, and you allow home occupation.
But it's an accessory use, and an accessory use is not allowed for hotels, inns, or lodging.
But what we're trying to figure out is at what point did it change being an accessory use home occupation and become lodging? Is it when they were renting 2 bedrooms? Is it when they were renting 6 bedrooms?
The lodging doesn't, okay, but technically lodging makes no difference how many rooms, 1 or 100.
But I think I could argue that if I'm renting 2, I haven't changed the residential character and it's a home occupation. I think the
No,
part
you haven't.
why
You haven't changed the use, but you've made it it is an accessory use, which is not allowed.
well, everybody's doing it. So this is why towns are having this conversation, because it needs to be more clear for the property owners what's allowed and what isn't.
And we do muddle it in our own definitions with the 2-family residential unit. In our definitions, it says 1 or both may be rented, and they are both, and that is permitted in both LDR. It's permitted across the board. So we're contradicting ourselves.
So a correction to the or a clarification to the definition of 2-family residence would solve that issue.
That's not what that's talking about, though. That's the state law when you have to allow an accessory dwelling unit, but you may or may not require the owner to live in one. That's what that's trying to say. Not. I think this is why you need to get the definition of transient in there.
Right, that's where you would handle transient.
Right.
You would make it long-term rental.
And I hear what you're saying, Carrie, like you're saying the transfer of money means that it's a business, right?
And what I'm saying is the benefit of exclusive type specifications is that if something new comes up, it's automatically not allowed, which is a good way to have it, because otherwise, every time something new come up, they assume it was allowed. And right now, the way I read it, with the possible exception of what you said, Wendy, with regard to the rental of the family's unit, residential unit, could be changed with one word, transient or long-term, that I think everything we've been discussing is already covered.
It is. It's not allowed right now. It's not explicitly allowed, but we know a lot of it's going on.
Well, then, but that's not to the planning. That's not to the planning board to take care of what's happening, what's not happening. It's what is desired, or what's the good policy, and then the rest of it's up to the selectmen and the safety department.
Well, I think that's what you're trying to do in filling in the table, is decide what's desired.
Just seems to be like we might be opening up a Pandora's box, trying to do something, and then as soon as you mess with the exclusivity, that you're just opening all kinds of roads to other problems.
It's really tough on your enforcement people right now to have it be this big gray area.
Okay, I agree with that.
It makes it so that the person breaking the law but quietly gets away with it, and the one breaking the law with noise and trash doesn't, and that's a little bit unfair.
No, but it seems to be working.
Okay, are we gonna put anything into these other boxes or?
You only have two more, you're so close.
Yeah,
Yes, I
yes.
would say, well, not owner occupied LDR, not allowed.
Yes, I agree.
One box to go.
Does this make a difference? Well, it's really a hostel, isn't it? It's,
Yeah, if it's not owner occupied, and we allow, numbers of rooms to be rented, it is a rooming house.
But are we talking about just numbers of rooms? Or are we talking about the,
No, the
Sorry.
concept.
I'm losing my,
you could divide this into numbers of rooms.
But I think it's better to leave it as a concept. This is, the gray areas that we've been trying to clarify deal largely with the concept, whether we allow it to occur or not. Or whether we say it's desirable, undesirable nature of the planning board's job.
So maybe, what if it's a bed and breakfast with a manager living there? Does that make a difference whether it's the owner or manager?
I think as long as it's a full-time person there, that covers what we're looking for, right?
Might put it in this new bed and breakfast category that we're thinking about.
Isn't that the nature of bed and breakfast? If you define it that as a bed and breakfast, is a bed and breakfast not something that is managed?
Yeah, it could be an owner or a manager.
Yes.
Maybe that's not what makes, maybe in this new bed and breakfast category we're thinking about, it would make a difference.
So what we're saying is we now have to have an entirely new definition area called bed and breakfast, other than what we see here.
I think what we're saying is you're thinking about it.
Well, it's also the fact that, as Tara has said, people are doing it. So, unless you define it and deal with it, it's going to continue.
And to kind of respond to Terry's point, in court, if something's done a lot and you don't do anything about it, they have a pretty good argument over time as arguing it's allowed as an accessory use.
Agreed.
Because accessory use in court is what's normal and accepted, and you're not saying otherwise.
Right.
Right.
And I think the reason we're looking at this new category of bed and breakfasts is to help us fill in that gray area, right, between home occupation and business.
Right?
Yes, and the part of this discussion started because of the phenomenon of Airbnb,
Right.
which is exactly what it is.
Airbnb, VRBO, it's becoming
But
a lot more,
all facilitated by the phenomenon of social media.
it's becoming a lot more typical for how we travel.
Right, but social media has made all of this possible.
Right.
And now that it's there, we can't continue to ignore it.
No, it's the same reason that, like, language, if you misuse a term long enough, it goes in the dictionary, right?
Yes.
It evolves with us.
Okay. So are we at a point, Tara, where we've given you something to be able to move forward?
I'm not sure, and that may be a budget question for Mark too.
Yeah.
I could, if you have it in the budget, I can take a day to go through your ordinance and look at all the language and all the places we need to do something. And draft some language. I couldn't get it out to you before your November meeting, but I probably could do it in time to share it with you at that meeting.
We should have it in our budget. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, with the select board giving us back some of our budget.
Mark had to step out of the meeting. He said if there are any questions that you can email him and he would get them back to you.
Okay, so I'll follow up with Mark and make sure that we can move ahead in that way.
I'm a little bit, yeah. Things are slowing down a little bit because you guys are coming to the party late. The big zoning amendment crunch time for me is getting to the end, and I've had a family member in the hospital 10 days, and I think that's gonna be resolving soon. So I should be able to do it right before your meeting.
Okay. So I'll check with
Well, is
Mark.
this something we want to discuss at our November meeting, or is this something that is going to absorb so much of our time at a regular meeting that we want to continue to do this? I don't want to say offline, it's the wrong word, but in a special session?
Probably depends what else you have on the agenda, right?
Yeah, I'd like to try to address it in the November meeting. I think we also need to kind of come to a consensus whether or not we're pushing this forward in trying to get it on for town meeting for 2021, or if we're just working early for 22. I personally hate trying to rush anything like this, but what does the rest of the board feel? Because that would affect how we would approach working on this.
And it would affect what it is you're asking me to do for your next meeting.
Right.
In order to get something on the 2021 town meeting, Mark's not there, maybe Tara knows or somebody else does, maybe Nick knows, when do we have to have it finished and exposed to have it on a 2021 meeting? Is that February?
You need to submit it to the town clerk. It's 5 weeks.
5 weeks?
So it's basically, you can have your public hearing in January.
That only gives us time for one public hearing.
If you only have one, technically, if you look at the zoning amendment calendar, technically you can have two, but it doesn't give you a chance to do the notices or make any changes. So you really want to be having your first hearing in December, I think, and allow for a second in January. And we think too about if there's anything you think might not be as acceptable to people, like say or you're on the fence about, like the bed and breakfast first acceptance, that the things in red you guys either didn't resolve or you were on the fence about, more on the fence about, have that as a separate amendment. And then you could decide after the first public hearing, we're just not gonna put that one forward, and you don't need to have a second hearing then. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with Wendy that we're running out of time to do this, and I can't come up with a reason in my mind why we want to push this.
I agree.
I think the answer to the question is that it's happening in town now. And whether or not we want to, do anything about it is, I think, the issue.
As it go on, the more it becomes an accessory use that you can't get your arms around.
Right. But I would still hesitate to say, and I think a lot of the reason it's happening so much now is because of our current circumstances. And I would hate to have that be the reason why we rush to a decision that's maybe not as thoroughly thought out as it could have been.
I would think that the reason it's going on now is that most people just assume they have the right to do it.
I agree.
And you're going to run into a problem as soon as you tell them you can't do it. I don't know how many people there are in that category. But I'm assuming there are a few, and they're going to be told you can't do this any longer. That's going to be an issue.
There's not much here that you're gonna be telling people they can't do that they're doing now. But you're gonna be saying the home occupation criteria apply to it, and that addresses parking and noise. You might wanna talk about adding a life safety code.
See, all we need is one incident. One problem, one eruption. And then you get at the other chorus of people who will say, why didn't you do something about this earlier?
Well, but I think the fact that we're working on it in good faith, it basically, so if we wanted to move forward for 21 town meeting, we would need to basically be at a point where we're finalizing our thoughts by November.
The beginning of December.
Well, we need to have time to post the public meeting, but yeah, very latest, end of November, early
Right.
December.
It's doable. I mean, that's the case where I could take a day and draft something, actual language for you to look at in November meeting. And you decide at your November meeting whether you are ready to have a public hearing in December, or maybe this needs to wait till next year. But if you already know, it needs to wait till next year, then I would suggest you don't pay me to do that day, but look at the table again at your next meeting and resolve some of these things that you're not sure about.
All right, I just look, and our November meeting is November 12th.
Yeah.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we say that this is going to be on our agenda for November 12th? Tara, try and get something that we can see, hopefully before, if not at that meeting. And let's decide then whether or not we can do this for 2021 or we're kidding ourselves.
Well, I think what you're saying is let's try.
What I'm saying is, yes, let's try, see where we are on 11/12 and whether or not we think we can do this or not. Let's try.
Okay. Let's
With
try.
the caveat that I'll follow up with Mark and make sure that where my head is at with the budget is correct.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not gonna happen before the week of your meeting.
Okay.
So, yeah, if you could get back to me before the 9th of November,
Oh, absolutely.
I'll pencil it in on that day.
I have some other appointments, and with your permission, I will say goodbye.
You have my blessing, my friend.
Thank you, Bill.
It's been a good discussion.
Yeah, you got a lot done in 2 hours.
Yeah, I think so. See you next meeting.
All right. Thanks,
Take
Bill.
care.
Okay, so then I guess we all need to continue digesting what we've talked about. And like I said, I'll email Mark right when we're done here to double check with the budget. I guess do as Mike suggested, and assuming that we have the funds available, to have Tara really plow through this for a day and give us something to look at in our November meeting. And then we can decide at that point what we want to move forward with and whether we want to move forward with it for 21.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question for Tara. Are there any state regulations on bed and breakfast, the way they are on lodging, where we need to do certain things legally in terms of fire safety and things like that?
If it hits a threshold to be a bed and breakfast under the fire code, then it does, right? There is a threshold in there. I can't remember offhand what it is.
Is it number of bedrooms or something?
I can't remember if it's number of bedrooms or number of guests.
Oh. Yeah, that might be something we should know so that we would know
Yeah,
that there's something we have to do about it.
I'll look up that definition. But part of what I'll do is look at some definitions for bed and breakfast too. That's one thing I would definitely take into mind. Anytime you can be consistent with the building code, it makes everybody's life easier. It makes Chris's life easier.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. Well, so if we're all in agreement with how we're moving forward, then I think we're probably finished for this morning.
I think you're right.
Any other comments?
Right.
Any
I'm gonna get this off the screen before you change your mind.
Look at everyone. Any motions floating around there?
Do we need a motion to adjourn a working group?
I believe we do, right?
All right, then I will move, we adjourn the working group and digest that, which we tried to do.
Why don't I send this table out so that it can all be.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
I'll second it.
All righty. All in favor? Nancy?
Nancy Knight, yes?
Mike?
Mike Capel, yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Wendy? Yes. Terry?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
The meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Tara.
Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.